I'm really happy today to introduce our third event, titled Managing Residencies During COVID-19, Legal Checklist for Nonprofit Organization. I think this for us and for residency managers is an essential topic. And I think this webinar will give the attendees the opportunity to get a better understanding of how to spot legal issues and how to best assess the legal health of your organization. This is really a crucial theme because it's key to increase the resilience of organizations and help organizations to survive this crisis and thrive in the future. And this is also important for the artists that go to residencies because they are in a way better protected if everything is in order in the organizations that host them. And with us today, there's Sarah Farrelly. Sarah is the Senior Legal Manager at TrustLaw. TrustLaw is the pro bono legal service of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And she oversees the Europe, Middle East, and North Africa region. Sarah handles legal pro bono projects from TrustLaw, the community of NGO and social enterprises, and Res Artis is one of them. And we are very grateful. We're very grateful to Sarah for accepting to present at this webinar and for sharing her knowledge and TrustLaw's expertise on the topic. With Sarah today, there's Lea O'Loughlin. Lea is the president of Res Artis. She's a long-standing board member of Res Artis, and she's also the co-director of Acme Studios in London.
So yeah, as Luigi said, I'm a senior legal manager working with TrustLaw, which some of you may have heard of, some of you not. So I'll briefly introduce the Thomson Reuters Foundation and TrustLaw. And then I'll take some time to run through some of the key legal issues that we have seen presenting for the nonprofits and social enterprise entities that we work with globally over the last number of years, but in particular over the last number of months in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So just to briefly introduce the Thomson Reuters Foundation, we're the charitable arm, as you can see on the slide here, of Thomson Reuters, which I'm guessing most of you will have heard of, obviously one of the largest news and information providers in the world. The foundation itself is a registered independent charity, and we're headquartered both here in the UK and we have offices in the US, but the TrustLaw team is dotted all around the globe. Our team is made up of 20 people. I am usually based in London, and they're working remotely from Ireland at the moment. And the Thomson Reuters Foundation essentially leverages the expertise, reach and reputation of Thomson Reuters to run our free programs, and TrustLaw, the legal program that I work for, is one of those services. So just to bring you on then to the core focus areas of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, they are basically largely circled around these three core areas. So the first one is media freedom. I guess more topical now, arguably, than ever before, and that encompasses all things media development, looking at things like fake news, misinformation, disinformation, a huge range of media freedom issues. We also focus on inclusive economies, which again is a very diverse topic, including things like social enterprise, modern slavery and trafficking. It also looks at data and digital rights. And then lastly, the core focus area of the foundation has always been human rights. And again, that is a huge term, and it encompasses all things from LGBT plus rights, women's rights, land and property rights, and TrustLaw's membership covers all of those different issues as well. So then on to the next slide, I'll just take you through some of our core services. So these are the 4 essential services of the foundation, and TrustLaw, which is the one I'll tell you more about now, is the service I work for. But to just briefly mention the other foundation services in case they are of interest, the foundation has its own news desk, so you can see there on the news coverage. Our journalists cover all of the issues that we just mentioned, and they really work to shine a light on issues that often don't make the mainstream media. So for probably 20 years now, we've been covering the likes of climate change, the climate crisis, and even shining a light on women's rights in parts of Africa, covering land issues. So really just drilling down into issues that often don't get picked up by mainstream media. Our media development team is actually the original team of the foundation. They started back in the 80s, and they really work to train journalists all over the world in principles of unbiased, independent reporting. So still kind of a really core focus of the foundation. TrustLaw is the legal service, which I'll move on to in a moment, but to just briefly mention the convening authority. Each year, the Thomson Reuters Foundation hosts its core conference called Trust Conference. It's usually taking place in person in London, and it covers all of the core focus areas I've just mentioned, bringing together nonprofits, lawyers, business people, activists, survivors, a really amazing gathering which really focuses on action and trying to drive forward progress on particular subject matters. And actually, excitingly, this year, there's going to be information coming out shortly, but our conference is going to be virtually online in November for one day, and it's going to be free to attend. So I'll make sure to share the information with Res Artis in case any of you are interested to join. So then to move on to TrustLaw. So you can move on to the next slide as well, thank you. So you can see here, TrustLaw, this is our impact to date. We are, as Luigi mentioned, the global pro bono legal service of the foundation, and we turned 10 years this year. And essentially what we do is we work with nonprofits and social enterprises all over the world to connect them with free legal advice. We've been doing that, as you can see there, for 10 years, and we've now grown to become the largest global pro bono network in the world. So we've over 6,000 members, which is made up of 5,000 nonprofits and social enterprises, and roughly 1,000 law firms and in-house legal counsel. And as you can see, the amazing number there of 120,000 plus legal experts, because some of the large international firms we work with count as just one legal member, whereas obviously they've got thousands of lawyers behind them as well. And what we do is try to facilitate pro bono legal advice and assistance for our members. As Luigi mentioned, Res Artis have been a member of TrustLaw for, I think it's about 7 or 8 years now, and they've been an active member of using our service and getting pro bono legal advice through TrustLaw. So just to take you on to the next slide, this gives you a snapshot briefly of the type of assistance that TrustLaw can facilitate for your organization. It largely breaks down into legal advice and then legal research. I'm going to go through a bit of detail today on the legal advice, but this is essentially probably 90% of TrustLaw's projects, and it's helping nonprofits and social enterprises with really their day-to-day core business and legal needs. So it's really the kind of almost boring legal issues that often nonprofits don't think about, or they don't really have the time to get to unless a problem arises. So this covers things like intellectual property, corporate law, which is governance and structuring issues, commercial contracts, any kind of banking and finance related issues, and employment, which is a really core issue, obviously, in particular over the last few months. And then just to mention on the legal research side, this is where we've been doing legal research reports and guides and resources for our members over the years on all types of issues. As you can see, some of them are listed there, but it's really where one of our organizations might identify a need for legal research to compare the laws, for example, on domestic violence across 10 different countries, if they want to lobby, for example, for a change in the laws in their particular country. So we've done lots of different legal research, and I can share the links for that. You can see it all on our website for free. So just to move on then to show you that the legal health check is really hopefully a helpful document for you all. It's again available for free on our website, and you can actually complete it as an online checklist as well. But essentially, we developed this about 4 or 5 years ago, and our legal team have calls on a daily basis with our nonprofit members to discuss with them their potential legal needs. So what we started to notice was whether you're a charity in Kenya or a social enterprise in the US, you often have the same kind of basic legal questions around, are my governance documents up to date? You know, I work with volunteers, should I have a legal agreement in place? So what we pulled together was this legal health check, which really touches on 7 or 8 of the core legal issues, and I'll run through some of them today. And just as kind of a prompter for organizations to think ahead, to think proactively around where they might need legal assistance going forward. And it's really designed to build the legal resilience and capacity of organizations to stop something going wrong. Too many times we've seen organizations come to us where there's a litigation or a dispute issue, and actually if it had been a few years before and they were able to put in kind of strong templates in place, that can really stop those issues coming up down the line. So yeah, you can just move on to the next slide there. I also just wanted to briefly mention, and we can share these on the webinar chat as well, but these are the resources that we've been developing over the last 6 months or so. Obviously, it's been an extremely challenging time for all of our members, all of the organizations and social enterprises we work with around the world. We've been doing a number of things in response to the pandemic. So on the left there, you can see we've developed a resource hub. We really didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and there are lots of really excellent legal resources out there. So what we've tried to do is pull them together in kind of a library of, you can navigate by region, by category, and it points you in the direction of some legal resources that might be available in your particular jurisdiction. In the middle there, what we did was we developed a short legal checklist, which was basically a follow-on from the legal health check, which really drills down into more specific questions which may be relevant in light of the pandemic and things you might want to start thinking about from a legal perspective. And then the last bullet you can see there is around our webinar series. So we've been running free webinars similar to this one all over the world for our organizations, not just our members, but non-members as well, with our law firm members, which actually have been very helpful, concrete, deliverable on particular subject matters. So we really found over the last 6 months, there was an urgent need for advice around contracts, employment law, data protection, even in terms of returning to work, lots of different issues. So if you are interested to find out more, do check out our webinar series. All of the ones that have happened so far are recorded and available for you to watch, and ones that are coming up will be available on that website as well. So just to then move on to the, just going to close out of my inbox so you don't hear the noise in the background. Yes, so just to turn to the legal issues and to touch on some of the issues that I mentioned. So structuring and governance. This is actually probably the most common legal issue that our members come across. And it's kind of the, I guess, bread and butter of organizations when they first establish. But sometimes organizations use governing documents like articles of association and constitutions, which may have been used from a template and they just haven't been reviewed since. So really ensuring that your documents are up to date and lawyers can help you review and amend them as needed. There may have been a change in the laws depending on what country you're in, and they might need to be updated, which it sounds a bit mundane, but it actually is really important to make sure that they align with your current activities, especially if those activities have changed at all in light of COVID. I think in terms of COVID, a lot of our organizations have started to explore new activities, for example, online fundraising and different things like that. So just making sure that if there is any risk assessments that are needed for your governance documents, to make sure that they're up to date. Also, interestingly, a lot of directors and trustees are starting to meet online, and just making sure that you understand, I guess, your full abilities to do that and what it is set out in terms of if you have an upcoming AGM, if that needs to be postponed or held virtually, just to kind of make sure that you have the right legal advice around how to do that in line with your governance documents. So then just to move on to staff and recruitment. So this has become obviously an extremely important issue. Employment law has always been one that's been often one that only organizations come to us when issues arise. Template employment documents are often pulled from friends that you know or other organizations, and they're just tailored a little bit. But I think it's really important to make sure that your template employment contracts, whether you work with consultants, and if you have interns working for you, volunteers, just to make sure that you have a really strong template that you can then use and adapt going forward. And similarly with a HR policy or staff handbook, again, to just make sure that that's up to date and really has been amended if needed in light of any changes of laws in your country. And just to touch on in relation to COVID-19, I know over the last 6 months, depending on where in the world you are based, the words furlough, the words, people having to take time off, issues relating to health and safety, issues relating to medical expenses, policies on working from home. There's been kind of a huge number of new terminology in relation to employment law that people may not have been super familiar with, and obviously also dealing with the likes of having to let people go, and it's just been a very tricky time for a lot of organizations. So in our checklist, we've included some prompter questions to have a think about for your organization. And if you do need further advice on that, it is worth getting in touch with legal advisors for that as well. So then just to move on to our next one, which is intellectual property and branding. This is particularly important if your organization or social enterprise has, for example, training materials that you use. So if you want to make sure that your copyright in those is registered, if you have a trademark, if your name or your logo or anything like that needs to be registered, you can get advice around whether or not that should be in one country alone, whether it should be global. I guess a lot of times we have organizations coming to us saying that they hadn't registered their trademark and they've now come across another entity operating under the same name, and trying to make sure there's template strong agreements in place before, I guess, before you get to that stage. So if you do produce kind of original resources or works, just getting a full intellectual property advice kind of assessment to make sure that you have all the relevant template documents in place is really important, and it can really strengthen your organization in case any issues do come up down the line. Then just to turn to contracts and policies. This is one that was particularly relevant over the last few months. I mean, I know a lot of our organizations were facing cancelled events, you know, had contracts which they'd entered into with partners, which they were no longer able to meet the obligations of, and just trying to help our network understand, if you do have existing contracts, perhaps with a venue, to understand your rights around cancelling or postponing. If you're now unable to perform your obligations in a contract, you know, do you understand the implications for that? Is there ways, you know, if you are delivering a service, can it be put on hold? And also trying to, I guess, negotiate alternative means of performing it. And if you are relying on others that are part of the contract to perform services, and if they are no longer able to do that, just getting full advice on your rights and obligations. And also, I guess, one important point is, and something we hadn't really conceived of the importance of before, is making sure that your contracts do have a clause around public emergencies. Before 6 months ago, it really wouldn't have been thought that that was key for a lot of organizations, but now it's becoming more and more important to just make sure that you're fully protected, or as protected as you can be. And I guess the last mention there is around GDPR. So obviously in the last few years, GDPR has become a hugely relevant and important topic for data protection in not only in Europe, but around the globe. If your organization processes any personal data, whether it's email addresses or contact numbers of individuals, it's just really important to have a conversation with a lawyer who's experienced with data protection, so that they can advise you as to perhaps any amendments you might need to make to your data collection processes, or if you do, you know, send out newsletters, things like that, just to get some advice around making sure that you're in line with this general data protection regulation as well. So then just to move on, the last legal topic I'll just touch on is tax and finance. Again, not the most riveting subject matter, but actually tax and finance advice is obviously super important to ensure the kind of financial sustainability of your organization. Oftentimes, some social enterprises we work with are really amazed at the kind of tax entitlements and tax breaks they're entitled to, and actually getting the advice from lawyers in certain jurisdictions can really make a huge difference to their financial sustainability. So just getting some advice from finance lawyers, we have a huge number of them in our network that are always really keen to advise around interesting finance questions. So yeah, just really getting a sense of whether your financial records and filings are up to date. If you're exploring, obviously over the last 6 months again, you might be exploring new sources of funding. You might be looking at changing if you have existing investment agreements or anything like that. Again, there might be new tax relief programs depending on where your organization is based in light of the crisis. So getting some advice around that is really beneficial to your organization. So then just to briefly mention the last few slides. So legal issues that we cannot support. So this is some areas that TrustLaw unfortunately just doesn't do. One is advocacy. What we can do is we can assist organizations with research, but we can't actually we don't get involved directly in advocacy. We also can't do requests for pro bono assistance on behalf of a third party. So oftentimes people will come to us regarding a collaboration or partnership agreement, and if there is a third party involved, the advice will only be for your organization. That third party will have to get their own independent advice. As I mentioned before, we don't get involved with litigation or disputes. So what we really do is try to build the legal capacity before it gets to that stage. We also don't get involved with visa applications or advice around work permits or visas for employees. Likewise, we don't get involved in administrative or tax issues. So we can advise around tax law, but we don't do like tax filings and that kind of thing. Urgent assistance is one that's important to understand. We can help if you want to prepare or review a contract that is kind of coming up or needing to be reviewed over the next number of weeks and months. But if you have, you know, an urgent contract that needs reviewing next week, TrustLaw isn't the right forum, because we need to have a number of weeks to process your request, to get you connected with a law firm in your jurisdiction, and for them to start giving you the advice. So just to bear that in mind. And then lastly, sometimes we get questions around translations of documents, so we can't do that either. So then just to briefly finish up, the next step for some of you, hopefully, we can send you on all of the information that I provided today, but our membership is completely free. I probably should have started with that, but TrustLaw is completely free for nonprofits and social enterprises, and also for our legal network. We're an entirely free service. And the application to become a member of TrustLaw, as Res Artis is already, our membership eligibility criteria, which I'll move on to in a moment, if you are matching that, or if you think you are matching that, you can submit an online application form, which is pretty straightforward. It just asks you to submit some of your governance documents and some information about the mission of your organization. It's pretty straightforward. And then our team will process your application. It's our program side of our team that actually do that, but normally it can be done in a few days. It's kind of maximum of 2 weeks. And then once you're onboarded, you can access our legal service. So just to go to the last slide then, I decided to just include this, and it's a lot of information, but I will we'll make sure that you have the link to find that on our website. This is the eligibility criteria for TrustLaw membership. So organizations need to be incorporated. I won't go through all this in detail, but just to touch on a few pieces, they need to be incorporated entities. And sometimes we get questions from organizations who aren't yet established entities. And for those organizations, what we have done is we have legal structuring guides across a number of different countries, which points you in the direction of legal entities you might want to establish as. And once you are established, then you can access TrustLaw's services. We also have requirements around non-discriminatory, apolitical work, working towards a social mission, ability to clearly express those social objectives. If you are generating a profit, we do work with social enterprises that are for profit, but they must be able to demonstrate that they're reinvesting at least half of their profits basically towards their social mission. TrustLaw is really supportive of social enterprises. It's a fantastic business model for the community. So we do support them, but just we do have that profit requirement. And then there's a couple of requirements around financial sustainability and kind of like an annual report as well. So that's our eligibility criteria. It's a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer questions about that. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope it was helpful, and there's lots of links within there that obviously we can make available, and most of them are available on our trust.org website, and I know some of them have been shared on the chat. So thanks so much, and I'm looking forward to chatting in a little bit as well.
So thanks a lot for your presentation, but also for TrustLaw more in general, for what you've been doing so far in the sector. And now I will leave the floor to Lea, who will be kind of presenting a kind of Res Artis position on how organization can be more resilient in general and particularly under the current circumstances.
Thanks, Luigi, and thanks, Sarah. I think it's worthwhile saying as well, just to say on a very practical, pragmatic approach. Times when Res Artis has sought the assistance of TrustLaw have been around when we've hired staff, when we've needed to do employment contracts, when we opened up our offices in Australia, when we needed to look at how we could, do that in a sustainable, appropriate manner, and when we needed to review our articles of association. So these absolutely key points in Res Artis' growth and organisational sustainability, we've always turned to TrustLaw, who have been brilliant. And the process itself, as Sarah said about joining as membership, but it's very clear and it's very useful, and you put out your direct request, which gets disseminated, and then individual practitioners or organisations get back to sort of raise their hand to say that they would like to help you. And I must admit, I don't think we could have gotten where we are today without them. So I do highly recommend the service they provide. So from the Res Artis perspective, which is in a way your perspective, because it is we're all about our membership and the things that are happening. I don't think, having had a look through our attendee list and recognising a number of names on there, I mean, I'm not going to tell you some information that you don't already know. It's a hugely challenging time at the moment. As many of you will know, Res Artis has a partnership with UCL and has been undertaking global residency survey about the current situation with COVID-19 and how that's been affecting residency providers and also artists. The information that we have back from that and that you've given us, has shown us that this is the single most challenging obstacle that has faced residency provision and the residency sector. Where that survey that we're doing is a 3-part survey, and what this series of seminars, for example, of webinars, is in response to what's come out of there, and we'll continue to support the sector and to support you as members as we go through this period. And that's a great way to give us a litmus test of what's going on. The first part of responses to that survey will be published in the next 3 weeks, and to give you a wider understanding of what your colleagues are going through as well. But there has been a near standstill of international residency activity, obviously, with a lot of restrictions around travel. And this has impacted residency organisations who, as we know, don't have financial cushioning and are already working on incredibly lean margins at the best of times. So some of the more pertinent questions that have come back to Res Artis, and I'd like to just remind everybody, if you're not already aware, but we do have a COVID FAQ section on the Res Artis website, which we've put available to all. So it's not just for members, there's information there. If you are not a member of Res Artis listening to this now, you can certainly go on the website and access that. And we do have more detailed support under the membership paywall as well. So things like example contracts and that could help you in your conversations going forward from today. One of the things that I think is important about now is the idea of taking a breath. This pandemic has taken a lot longer than anybody really expected. I think regardless of which country we were in, once sort of lockdown happened, there was this foggy notion that it might be maybe 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. But of course, what has unfolded is incredibly different to that scenario. And so there comes a point, I think, for every organisation, and especially for residency organisations that have been in limbo, to sort of take that moment, take a breath, and put their head up and stop looking at the immediate, because of course we've had to deal with the immediate and there's an immediate crisis situation. But I think now what we're really trying to do is to urge our members to look a little bit more long term. This situation has gone on, for give or take about 6 months. To be perfectly honest, nobody knows what the future is going to hold, but it's entirely likely that the effects of this are going to be felt, you know, rather acutely, at least for another 6 months, and probably for a few years to come. So organizationally for you all, this is a time very much to take advantage of the resources that are out there, of those legal checklists, and to think about your sustainability as an organization. I know that a number of you will be reliant on government funds, government funding, and some of you won't. It'll be self-generated income. But taking a very pragmatic look at when you need to stop operations or mothball, when you're able to continue, and how you can adapt going forward is incredibly important. And so what we would be urging you at the moment is to start to think about that forward planning beyond the immediate. So that's one thing that I wanted to flag up in terms of sustainability, is looking at that business planning, revisit business planning, revisit goals, whether you're looking at 2 or 3 or 5 year strategic plans. Now is a really good time to dust those off and really think about them in a new light. And it's all about those steps. So like, what proactive steps are you taking to protect your organization into the future, and to protect the ability to provide these opportunities to artists? So that's on a sort of governance level, one of the things that we would urge, you know, the most consideration about. On a personal level, which I think is incredibly important when it coming down to staffing, as Sarah was talking about, we know that in the best possible scenario for residencies, staff burnout is one of the single largest issues that face residency organisations. And that's in ideal situations. We're currently in a situation that is far from ideal. So in terms of the personal and staffing, one of the things that we should absolutely be looking at is the mental health and the capacity of staff to continue operations. So not necessarily just thinking about, are we, you know, legally able to open, but actually, should we open, or what activities should we be continuing to do, and what capacity does our staff have to take these projects forward at the moment? So that's a very big thing, because we're working, we know all of our organisations, you know, work with, you know, lean numbers of staffing, work with volunteers, work with individuals who, you know, everybody is going through a manner of their own stresses, as well as trying to do their best for organisations and for artists. So that's another area I think that's really important to take stock of at the moment, and to connect on a personal level to staff, to volunteers, and to really have a sense check from everybody involved with your organisation about where their energy levels are, where their commitment is, and what you can do to get through this period, and also to build and come out sort of stronger, or reshape in a way that works for the people who have put their heart and soul into the enterprise along with you. So that's the second sort of part that I wanted to bring up, and I would be really interested to hear conversations from our attendees about where they're at the moment. The third part, of course, and which is always central to everything that we do, it's the artists. So it's the personal in terms of artists, and hosting artists, and being part of the professional development and international cultural exchange for artists. So this is a difficult time for us as residency providers. It is a hideously difficult time for individual artists. Most artists who have seen not only their artist livelihood drive up, but the majority of artists who support their practice through other paid opportunities or non-cultural paid opportunities are actually also seeing that income dry up as well. So it's a hugely stressful time. So what I would say with that, in terms of having conversations with artists who are either on residency, have delayed residencies, or possibly the cancellations of residencies, is just remembering that human. And we always say, from a Res Artis point of view, to come back to those Res Artis values, professionalism, diversity, transparency, sustainability. Many issues can be resolved or solved before they begin if we start from the point of recognizing huge stresses on individuals and recognizing people as people with their own individual situations. What we have seen at Res Artis it has actually been gratifyingly small number of disputes that have come back to us that have been unsolved or difficult between artists and organisations at the moment. But the ones that have come back are really, communication has been key, or lack of communication has been a huge component of why those situations have spiralled. And quite often it is really simple things like neglecting to understand that the pandemic has affected different regions in different ways, and that one country might be experiencing a complete and utter lockdown, another country might actually have a lot more freedoms. So we're looking at a disconnect between potentially an artist who is able to travel but a residency provider who is not able to host them, or vice versa. A residency might be completely up and running and open for business, but the artist who was committed to come, they could quite simply not be able to get on a flight out of their country. So as Sarah was saying before, these are elements that have, especially in terms of contracts, that have been to the periphery in the past, because it's been less likely to have an issue where, where government measures have meant that you can't travel or that you're unable to fulfill part of your residency contract. But this is, in many ways, moving into this new territory. So these are absolutely things in terms of our artist contracts that we really need to be thinking of a little more clearly now, especially thinking through ideas of, what those policies might be in terms of, refunding residencies, or what is a reasonable policy to reschedule residencies, and getting ahead of those situations going forward, I think is absolutely key for all involved. They were the main points that I wanted to touch on and to provide a bit of context. But as with everything that we do with Res Artis, we're about our community and we're about you as our community. So I'd be really keen to actually hear from our attendees now about whether they've got particular comments or specific concerns weighing on their minds. As Sarah said earlier, we can't give specific legal advice. TrustLaw can't, and neither can Res Artis, but what we do, or what Res Artis always does, is provide a resource, a communal room, and also our own individual experiences and expertise in terms of helping people to navigate solutions or think of ways that they can tackle finding their own solutions. So I'd like to open it up to our attendees.
I'll start with a question to Sarah, because many of the organizations in the sector, they are quite small, and they struggle on a kind of permanent basis. So the resources are very limited, time is very limited, and sometimes what happens is that legal aspects of running the organizations are deprioritized in a way, because the most important thing is to open the exhibition, is to get a grant in order to survive, etc., etc. So how can, if you had to kind of sum up the benefits of going through the legal checklist for an organization, how would you sell it in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess to start by saying, the legal health check isn't designed to scare people. I know a lot of times, understandably, if people are unfamiliar with legal issues, they can be really intimidating and quite worrying. And I know obviously people's priorities is their day-to-day work, and they kind of just push aside the legal stuff again until something goes wrong. And in order to really try to ensure the sustainability and long-term success of organizations' work, I think it's never too late to just have a look at the legal health check, to really take stock to share it if you do have colleagues within your team. Some people will be familiar with certain elements like HR, or others might be more familiar with the contracts maybe. So really just to have a read through it and to think, as Lea was saying, that kind of longer term idea of thinking, okay, some of our templates are a bit old, let's try and ensure we can update them even over the next few months, and just take it stage by stage. You don't have to tackle everything right now. It's really just to map out over the next 6 months, next year, what kind of core legal issues you want to make sure you've gotten support with. And I think every time we have calls with our organizations, and once they've had that piece of advice from lawyers, it's just such a weight off their mind. Like it's something that they hadn't really thought about, but now that they know they have these strong contracts in place, it puts them in just a much better position, even in terms of applying for funding, working with partners. It just makes it easier to sleep at night, a lot of our organizations say. So just to really have a look at it, not be intimidated by it, and whether you're able to apply for TrustLaw membership and get the advice through our service, or to take avail of other services that are out there. There's lots of assistance out there for organizations. So just to take it slow, but have a look and start to get that advice as soon as you can.
Lea, what would you say, like, on the topic? So if you like had to kind of advise a small organization with conflicting priorities and not so many resources, what would be, if any, like additional strength of making sure that the organization is healthy from a legal standpoint? So, for instance, if I had to mention one myself, I would say that contracts are not there just to protect the organization, also there to protect those around us. So if you have a solid system which is transparent, it's not just to protect the organization, but also artists, visiting artists, they're also more protected. There's less ground for disputes, less ground for miscommunications. So this is why I think it's really crucial to invest in this.
Well, absolutely. I think it is crucial, but I think also it's more than that. I think it is about avoiding conflict in the future. And one of the things, I mean, to be perfectly blunt, for a number of organizations, especially the smaller ones, it's really important to have the contracts in place, especially if we look at visiting artist contracts or things like that, because it sets expectations. It's transparent. People understand what they're doing. They can be excited about the opportunity that's going forward. For many organizations, the most important thing about that is the relationship and is the transparency, because ultimately for a small organization, if that contract's not honored, for example, if you've got an artist coming from another country and something happens and then that breaks down and the contract itself is not honored, it is unlikely, or less likely if you're a small organization, that you're going to pursue that, because of the cost involved and so forth of going back and forth. What is more pertinent to you as an organization is your reputational damage. If you've not behaved in a clear and transparent way, and you can't look to and look to very clearly about how expectations were set out and that you have behaved as an organization in an appropriate manner, in this day of social media and quick responses, it's very, very easy and very, very quick for an organization or residency enterprise, to start getting a lot of negativity from artists online, or negativity and back and forth. So actually having the contracts in place and going through these things, as Sarah has said, at a time that's non-dispute and non-crisis, and getting ahead of that curve, really helps an organization in so many more ways than just the idea that, oh, this is a contract that sits in a dusty cupboard or in an email that we don't look at. It really helps to frame conversation and frame your relationship with communication. The other big thing that is hugely important at the moment is that for most enterprises, depending on where you're based and who you're looking at for future funding and for funding at the moment, you need these things in place. Like if you're talking to local authorities or you're talking to government and you're wanting to access things like emergency funds, quite often they want to see your articles of association. They want to see that you have a solid sort of legal basis that you're working from, regardless of the size of your organization. So if you're thinking now about next year or going forward or new programs or rebuilding, actually this is the basis that you're going to need to build from.
So thanks again, Sarah and Lea, for your time and participation.